Hello, everyone. I hope y'all can hear me, and if not, hopefully friends will let us know in the chat. But Nolan, are you able to hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Excellent, awesome. Hopefully everybody else can hear you. If not, I'm sure people will ping us. So let's get started. So before we get started, though, I oh shoot, I had that on my other thing. I gotta mute that. Sorry about that. So okay, there we go. So right. So we originally had planned to have Alex Runyon on here to show us all this magical debugging stuff with Telescope. However, unforeseen circumstances happened, and Nolan has been kind enough to step in. And Nolan is one of our senior software engineers as well. So let's just get started with the introduction here. So my name is Ethan Pressberg. I'm the Director of Technology Solutions here at ProcessMaker. And you can catch some of my thoughts or stuff on Twitter. Check out my projects on GitHub and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to talk to the community. Also, you can see there's a little a QR code, should be on the bottom left corner, that you should be able to use to join our Discord server where I'm always there, and a couple of other of us are there too to help answer any questions and just in general help with open source related stuff. No support guaranteed, just trying to help out. Um, so Nolan is very prolific on social media, and so he has a GitHub account. So that is Nolan, and you can see he's playing his favorite sports. I don't know, Nolan, if you want to talk a little bit about yourself first.
Oh, I guess you probably have an image up there of, or my icon
Yep,
of probably the one of me curling. Is that what it is?
exactly. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, it's a ridiculous sport. You might have seen it. Sometimes it's on TV like the 2 in the morning on the Winter Olympics. Um, it's um, it's kind of funny that it's considered a sport, but it's actually a fantastic game. Um, and uh, and if you've never tried it, look up your local curling club and and show up. They usually do what's called learn to curls, where you can just show up and pay a fee, and they show you how to curl for 2 hours. If you're not Canadian and you don't know what curling is, look it up. It's actually a really fun sport. And
I'll have to try it sometime.
Yeah, I was able when I visited Durham last time. I went to the local curling club
I
over
remember I
there.
drove you. Remember? I dropped
Yeah,
you
that's right. Yeah, and they have a great facility, and they have what they call dedicated ice, which means that they have a facility that's just used for curling, which we do not have the luxury of in the desert here in Las Vegas. We have to share our
off.
ice with hockey players and figure skaters who like to put big gashes in the ice. It's not ideal for the very finessed sport of curling. Um, so I try to play on dedicated ice whenever possible. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. Cool. So, awesome. So that is who we are. And I also just want to give folks a heads up on what you're going to see today, right? So, we're going to cover. We already covered the introduction, and or we're in the middle of it. So we're going to talk about Telescope. So what exactly is Telescope? We're going to have Nolan talk us through that, and he hopefully will be able to show us how one can easily set up Telescope in your ProcessMaker environment. And we're going to go through some actual bugs and see how Telescope actually helps us immensely and makes Nolan's life and the rest of the engineering team a lot simpler and easier to get to it. Did I misspeak or anything, Nolan, or is that accurate?
No. Yeah, that's a good introduction.
Cool. And then just I'd be remiss if I didn't, talk a little bit about, our company and who we are and where we came from. So this little timeline, I think, represents pretty nicely where we started and where we're at now. So ProcessMaker was founded by Brian Reel and Bobby Vernon in year 2000 in Miami, and it started off as building workflows, custom workflows for customers and stuff. And then in 2008, they decided to make it into an actual product, an open source product. And so in 2008, the first version of ProcessMaker was born. Then 2 years later, we iterated over it and we launched V2, which had a ton of great updates. I still remember the Neo Classic skin for those of you who are from back then. And by the year 2011, so only 3 years after we launched the product initially, we had well over 1 million downloads on SourceForge. What's SourceForge now, right? Who remembers what SourceForge is? It used to be the go-to for anything open source. Now, yeah, nobody really hears of it. And then in 2015, we launched ProcessMaker 3, which was added a whole new set of capabilities, a new modeler, exciting functionality. And then in 2019, we launched ProcessMaker 4, which is what we're currently on, sort of, and I'll get to that in a second. And then shortly after, in 2021, we got our first round of funding, and so we're really trying to grow. And there, shortly after, we acquired an IDP solution to add to our toolkit. And then now we have what's called ProcessMaker Platform, which is essentially ProcessMaker 4, but we're getting away from versioning it in terms of numbers like that. So it's just going to be ProcessMaker Platform now, and I believe the current release is summer, and Nolan is busy working on the fall release when he's not doing live streaming with me. And also in 2022, as most people know, OpenAI came out with ChatGPT and literally shattered the world with generative artificial intelligence. And we definitely recognized how important it is. Personally, my opinion is that it's bigger than the printing press. Like, it is a tectonic shift in our technology and in our life. Like, I can't remember what it's like to live without my best friend ChatGPT. Honestly, I can't remember. So we are embracing that, and in 2023 and 2024 and beyond, we are going to be even more doubling down. We've already introduced our text to process, so natural language, converting that into a BPMN process. We're going to have text to screen, so you can be able to do the same thing to create a form. We've got global search, where you can just type in a query, and just say, like, show me all the processes that are assigned to me, and it'll just show it to you. You won't have to figure out any kind of special syntax for filtering or anything like that. It's really a game changer. So, with that said, I'm going to now hand it off to my good friend Nolan. Are you ready, Nolan?
Yeah, sure. You can see my screen.
Not yet. Let me adjust it here in my studio. One moment. Let me hide mine and show yours. All right, you're good. I'll mute myself.
Okay. Yeah. So this was just since, I was kind of, Ethan asked me to do this at the last minute. And I figured, well, I'll just kind of show him how I debug some stuff. And there's some actual bugs that I'm working on right now. And I can show you guys how I'm using Telescope to kind of help me with that. I don't use Telescope all the time. I'm working a lot in the terminal a lot, but Telescope is really valuable. And just in the last hour, I was able to get in there and take a look at it again and see how useful it really is. So this is what Telescope looks like. If you just go to ProcessMaker or whatever your instance is, and you go to Telescope, you'll be brought to the Telescope dashboard. There's no link to this. You just have to type it in. It's a developer tool, so it's not really supposed to be visible to everybody. Also, you'll need to enable it. So I had to do this myself and just kind of
Hey,
got up to
Nolan,
speed.
real
Hmm.
quick, would you mind making the resolution maybe a little bit bigger? It's a little bit hard to
Sure.
see.
Let's
Sorry.
see. Yeah, no problem. Let's see if Tmux can handle that. Is
Ah, perfect. That's
that
much.
better?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I don't live stream very often at all, really, so it's something people need to remind me to do.
Cool.
Um, so anyway, this is what Telescope looks like, and when it's running already set up. So in order for me to set this up, I had to do a few steps in my development environment. First thing I had to do was go to my environment file. So let me just do this in Visual Studio Code. It'll look a little nicer. Same here. I'll pump this up a bit. Let me go to my .env file, which is not always visible because it's a hidden file, to VS Code. And in here, we have all of our configuration, right? So you'll have this all set up. If you have a working instance of ProcessMaker, you'll have something that looks like this in your root.env file. Um, and in here, you just got to look for telescope. Telescope is disabled by default, so it's going to look like this, right? So we leave it disabled by default because it does have a little bit of overhead when it's running because it's constantly logging things to a telescope database. So we do leave it off, turned off by default, but you are welcome to turn it on. And once you do that, there's a couple other steps that I realized we need to I need to do before I can run it. One is to run the installer, which is Artisan Telescope Install. So I've already run this, and you're just going to see the duplicated output that I just ran. And you're going to see, oh, you also have to, this was tricky. It didn't tell me right here, but you got to run the migrations too. So we have to run Artisan migrate. And it says nothing to migrate right now, but before when I ran it for the first time on this instance, it ran the create telescope entries table. So only when I've done those steps can I go in to telescope, reload this page, and you'll see something that, looks like this. So there you go. It defaults to just a list of all the recent requests. This should update in real time. So if I wonder if I can split screen here. It's a little messy, but if I reload this or reload my page here, you can see it's automatically adding any requests, including all the API calls that come along with this screen that loads when you reload your request screen. So so that's where you can list everything. All of this stuff is in here, which is pretty cool. It shows you recent uh, artisan commands. If there were any problems with that, it's going to show that. It's going to let you see what we have in our in the schedule, but there's nothing in there right now. Jobs or any backend queued jobs that got run. Batches, I don't think we have this configured. Same thing, cache. Dumps is probably the most valuable for debugging. So that's what I'm going to take a look at. So let me put this back in here. Oops. So I was just playing around in my local environment, and I noticed that if I go to the About page locally, I'm getting this error, right? It cannot resolve host. So I'm like, what's up with that, right? Um, this is another very valuable page for debugging because this shows you the whole call stack in a real easy way, right? Now there is some extra sort of stuff in here that may not be obvious, but usually the first thing that's highlighted on here is what triggered the error. So it says the about controller in line 89, and it's in this method called get microservice. And the message it's saying is that it's trying to make a curl call, and it cannot resolve this host PM get version. So let's pop in there and take a look. In the about controller, actually I'm in ProcessMaker B. Let me go to ProcessMaker A. There we go. So you have all this wonderful stuff in here, right? So here's that function, get AI microservice. It looks like this is something that Augustine did, and it has to do with just, I guess, listing information about this new microservice, but it is throwing an error on my machine. So one thing I will do here is I can just show you how dump works. Now, dump is a really valuable command. There's two commands that I use a lot for debugging when I'm debugging in the browser, dump, and the other one you'll see a lot is dd, right? They're similar. dd stands for die and dump, right? Dump will continue execution, but dd will not. So for example, if I just do dd hello here, and I refresh my page, well, it's going to throw me a 500 error because I don't Uh, let's see. They currently probably because debugging is not enabled. Let me see. No, no, app debug is enabled. Let's just do dump for now.
Do you have your environment set to local?
It is, I think. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And
and I don't know why it wasn't showing the DD output, but I don't normally use that in the front end anyway.
hmm.
Um, but
Yeah, what I like about
let's
dump is that you can just, look at Telescope while the app is running without having to, kill it like that.
yeah, for sure. So it'll only work if there's no dump, like will only output at the very end. So it's not going to work if there's errors in there like there is right here. So I'm just going to comment all of this out in this controller action and just put dump to show you what that looks like. So if you're on the dumps page, and you have to be on this page in order to see these dumps when they come back, right? So you can put any number in here. This is really useful if you're in a loop, for example. Um, and you don't want to, you maybe need to inspect a variable that's like deep in the loop, it's like the 10th iteration or something. And if you just die and dump, uh you'll only get the first one, right? So sometimes I'll start with DD, but otherwise I'll add it in here, and you can see that it just outputs these two. If you're not on this dumps page, if you don't have a tab open with Telescope and you're on the dumps page, let me just go back to like the request page. It's actually going to dump that right out to the screen. I
That
thought it would.
explains what I was going through
Ah,
before. Because I was like, why was that happening? And I couldn't figure out why I was dumping there instead of. That makes so much sense. Thank you, Nolan.
yeah. Keep that in mind. Let me see if DD works now. Yeah, okay. So it was because we were on on the Telescope request page. So you can see DD stops execution entirely. So you can see where that might not be useful if you're in a loop, for example, and you want to output all the variables in that loop. If you had a DD inside of a loop, you would only see the first variable, and it would just stop execution entirely. Um, but with dump though, you can have, any number of dumps. You can comma separate these however you want, and it's going to go ahead and just continue execution and just output all of those. And it's a nice thing with Laravel 10 is it actually show this is new in Laravel 10. It actually shows you where your dump is. Sometimes I leave dumps all over the place and I forget where I put
Huh.
them, and I'm like, I gotta go search for this thing.
Hang
This
on. Why,
actually will
why
just,
did it kill
huh?
the sidebar though?
Oh, because this kind of injects formatting on its own. It's really just for debugging. There's no way to really make it look pretty.
Uh-huh.
Well, I take that back. There probably is some way that we can make this, look prettier or put it in some sort of toolbar or something like that. But for debugging purposes, yes, it kind of just injects it right under the body tag of the HTML. So it's gonna screw up your formatting a little bit. But that's okay. These are temporary, right?
Sure.
This is just for our own debugging purposes. Um, what I also wanted to show you is I work mostly in the console, and usually when I'm trying to solve these types of issues, I'm running unit tests to do it, right? So there should be an about test, and there is. If there's not, I'll create one. I try to make it like a rule of thumb that, and I don't always do this to be honest, but I try to make it so that if there is a bug that we find, we try to write a unit test around it, right? Like that's just sort of like good practice, right? That way, if it breaks again in the future, we'll know right away in our automated tests. Um, so usually when something like this comes up, I'll see, well, was there a test for this, right? So if I run this, let me just oh, sorry. Now this is going to take a minute at first because it has to initialize the database. It actually has to run all the migrations for a separate test database, so we're not messing um, with our local environment database. So if you give this a second to just run this about test, we'll see what this does. Okay. So we have all of our outputs here too. So if I want to run this again, I can do, I have a, what is it called? Let me look at PHP unit. So I have a shortcut for this, but I think it's called populate database. This is the slow command that populates the test database. So what I'll do is I'll run the same command again with populate database false, and it runs really fast. There you go. All right, but you do need to run it the first time to get the database set up, the test database that it needs. But that's a story for another time for testing unit tests in ProcessMaker. Um, but you can see the same DD commands will also nicely output during your unit tests, or any other console command for that matter. If you're in Tinker or something like that, um, you'll get these nice formatted messages that help you debug wherever you are, right? So in this case, what I want to do is, since we have this, I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm just going to discard my changes here. And I want to make sure that I'm back at that error message that I was seeing. Where is it? Right. So when, oh, right, I was running the terminal in here. What I want to check is, why was this was throwing the error, right? And I think what was happening is, at least it looked like, it couldn't find this URL, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and dump that URL, see what I'm dealing with. And we'll just do it on the front end here. And let me make sure I'm back on my dumps page. Okay. So it's looking like it's just trying to get PM get version, which is a route that doesn't exist, at least locally, right? Like these other routes, like about or whatever. And that's because it's trying to get this microservice host that looks like it's returning null.
They're just getting that string it can cats, but not the configuration.
Yeah, so config will return null by default, and then when you concat here, null just turns into an empty string. So, I mean, I can verify that by just like, if I, copy this and stick it in my dump here. Oops. Let's just let's do it this way. Oh, I'm gonna reload that page. Yeah, so it's null.
Mm.
Um, so what I can do is search for this and try to find out where that's coming from. And it looks like this will be in config in app.php. Sometimes these could be in packages, so you got to watch out for that too. Although if it's being called in core, it should be defined in core technically. Uh, so this is trying to get an environment variable called AI microservices host. And I'm pretty sure I just do not have that. Yep, I don't have it in here. So what I would like to do is that even if this is not defined, because this is pretty specific and I don't want to go in and set up a microservice locally, I'd actually just like to change this about, um, so that we don't,
Like, why would an about need it, right?
yeah, I mean, I guess if it's there, we want to show information about it, right? And that's what it's doing. It's first checking to see if the package AI is installed, which I do have installed, but I don't have this configuration set locally.
Right.
So let's also, before we change any of this, let's also run the unit test without any of the die and dump stuff. So you can see it is failing here too. It's the same error message uh, in the unit test. It's failing. So that tells me that our CI server, which runs these, must have that configured in it, but locally we don't. So what I think would be a good solution here is just to also check if the config value is set. So I'm just going to go ahead and just add this to here.
And is
and
this
run
only
the test
happening
again.
in the about page, or is it happening elsewhere too?
Well, this is the only time that this is being referenced in core, it looks like. So
Because
there's
like,
something in model or controller.
wouldn't it still be needed for the global search? I'm sorry if I'm just trying to think out loud here.
Mhm.
Like
It
gotta be
is,
on the
but
about page. You want to be on the global search for AI, right?
yeah, but my guess is that if you don't have the package installed, it's not gonna care.
Sure.
Um, but it's also in this case, the about page is something that I mean, it looks like since I have it installed locally, but I don't have it configured locally, and that seems to be what's causing the problem. Then I think so. In this case, this would run the same thing. The in-flight process AI. That's interesting. Who wrote this? Oh, Augustine did this too. Um,
Augustine's the man, huh?
he wrote a lot of the AI stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So a lot of these packages that are utilizing the OpenAI API endpoints um, were written by Augustine and put into this package called ProcessMaker AI. Um, so this I think should solve, at least in the about controller, um, for local development, that should solve this problem. Is that we don't have it in here, right? So test pass now as long as you have this check. So in my case, this would just be for development because it already seems to be working in our CI environments because this is already configured. So there's a few things you could do. You could um, uh, you could have a default value for this, for example, for the AI microservice host. But I kind of don't want to do that because it's just going to be an invalid URL, right? No matter what you put in. So unless there's a public URL somewhere that we can use that points to the AI microservice, but I don't think there is. Not 100% sure about that, but um, it would probably be best just to leave this as is, and I'll just go ahead and commit this as a simple bug fix, or maybe just kind of sneak it into one of our other bug fix issues that we're working on at the same time. Um, but for right now, I can just leave this as is. So I'm trying to think if there's anything we can do for the unit test, and I don't think there is because it was already failing locally. So if I didn't have this in there, we were seeing a failure, which is what I expected, which is a good thing. So I think this is, um, this is one way that you can debug. Um, I've always favored unit tests over anything else if you can. Also because it's faster too. It's a lot easier to just run a command than it is to go in and um, then reload the page. Or if you're debugging like a form or something like that, you got to fill out the form and create the user. Just write an automated test for it. Because you can rerun this fast over and over again until your tests pass. Um, or you can and then when you're done with it, then you have something that is run automatically on every build that we do. So it gives you confidence in the code that you fixed, right? The more unit tests, the better, in my opinion.
I think it was Adam Stone that said if you do anything more than twice, you should always automate it.
Yeah. So that's yeah, totally right.
Yeah.
um, and uh, and the nice thing about what they call, you might have heard the term test driven development, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that means write your test first and then write your code, right? And that's a really good way to develop because it forces you to write one, it forces you to write testable code. That's really important. You can't just go in there and cowboy code a bunch of features and then expect to write some tests later and expect those tests to work, right? Or you to even be able to test it. Code needs to be written in a way that's testable, right? And the nice side effect about that is that even if you don't think about it, if you write testable code, um, your application is going to be more readable. It's going to be more maintainable. Other engineers are going to know how to add features and debug it a lot easier. And that's why TDD, or test driven development, has been such a big thing in the last 20 years in software development, right? Is that and I forget who came up with the term originally. It might have been Martin Flower or
Well, I can
one of
ask
those engineers.
ChatGPT while you talk.
Yeah, that's ChatGPT who came up with the term test-driven development. And it may even be older than 20 years because, people have been writing software and tests for decades, right?
Kent Beck
Um,
in the late 1990s.
late 90s. Okay, so I
Yeah,
wasn't that far off.
yeah. Kent Beck
um,
guy, yeah.
yeah, but anyway, the benefits of doing that are huge, right? Because you were writing code that's testable, um, and you will be forced to use certain paradigms, like for example, dependency injection. The first time I heard the word dependency injection, I thought it was a bad thing, like SQL injection, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So don't be scared. Dependency injection is a very, very good thing, and we see this all over our app. I'm even in the controller right now. I'll look for an example. Well, I don't see it here, but what you can actually do is in, say, an index controller, or any one of your controllers, you can say, well, I want to access the request, right? This is a common one you'll see in a lot of places, right? Or let me open like the user controller. Uh, and if I go to the show method, which is the standard Laravel, see, so here's a user, and what we're doing is we're injecting the user into this, right? And that means that that since this thing, any kind of the rule of TDD and good software development in general is that hopefully, if your code relies on anything outside of the function itself, you should probably see if you need to inject it, right? An example of how we can make this better is like look at auth. Auth is a constant. It's a helper, but it's not dependency injected, which means what happens if I want to test this method? I mean, sorry to hijack this and go into testing
Oh,
evangelism,
man,
but
go for it.
but every time I want to explain this to people, like how important it is, right? Suppose I want to unit test this method, and a unit test is the most precise form of test. It's the most a focused form of a test, which means it should only test what's in this code. Now, I admit, ProcessMaker, if you look at our test folder, we don't have a lot of unit tests. We have a lot of feature tests. Feature test is when we make an API call and we expect the response to be a certain way. A unit test is let's just test this one little unit of code. So if I wanted to test this show method right here in the user's controller, um, I wouldn't be able to control what auth is doing, and I need to be able to control what auth is doing so that I have something concrete that I can expect in my results, right? So if I want to inject so this is checking a permission. So suppose I want to write two tests, one where the user has permission and one where the user doesn't. Well, how do I inject that user, right?
Hmm.
So this is interesting because uh, it's in this case, we're checking to see if the authorized user for this, whoever's accessing the application, whoever's logged into ProcessMaker, can view this user, which may be themselves or it may be another user. So the dependency injection side of this is that automatically when we look at our API routes and we go user um, if we look at the users, let's just find the user controller here, right? If we go to user and we say in brackets that we're going to give it this user, this is the ID of the user that we want to look at, right? What it's going to do is if you put it in brackets like this, it's going to inject that into the controller here when this thing runs, so I have access to this user. And this is working right now. Um, what we don't have in here, and this is great, this is an example of a dependency being injected. What we don't have right here is the authorized user, the person that's logged in. And that means that if I run a unit test and I run the show method, I can pass in whatever user I want here, but I cannot pass the authorized user into this method. And the way I could fix that is actually just by, since the Laravel framework handles dependency injections really well, I can actually tell it that I want the authorized user, but I have to get that through the request object. And look, it's already suggesting it for me because it's used so often throughout the system. The request is this
Quick question: are
illuminate.
you using GitHub
Hmm?
Copilot?
No, so I tried GitHub Copilot. I tried a few other ones, and I just like experimenting with different code tools. Right now, I'm using one
Yeah.
called Codium. It's free. It's decent. It's not as good as GitHub Copilot. I'm probably going to go back to GitHub Copilot. But right now, I just have it configured to use Codium. Codium it has a free um,
I'll check it out.
free Codium open. It has its free like little chatbot, which is very similar to ChatGPT when this loads. It's got
Nice.
a lot of nice features. Yeah, they're the underdog, and they're trying to keep up with
Well,
the
I'm
big
so
bad
gonna
wolf.
install that after this.
Yeah, Codium is a fun. It's a Codeium. It's a fun
Yeah,
free, pretty decent for tab completion. You know,
cool.
it's not quite as robust as GitHub Copilot, but it's worth a shot. But anyway, so we're rejecting the request object. Now, this is an object that represents the request. So it could include the headers. It's going to include the URL. It's going to include information, cookies. It's going to include information about the user. And so it has a nice little feature where I can just call it the user. So I would actually change this to um, instead of auth user, I'm going to call this. I think it's here that request user. And immediately here and I think it's not even with a function, it just resolves to user. So this should work because the request has a user property on it. And it would be null if the user was not logged in. But in this case, they wouldn't even be able to get here if they weren't logged in. But I wanted to show this as an example because now I have control over this. I can create a mock request object with whatever user I want and send it in to this to test this function, right?
Can I ask
And
you
I
a
can
question,
change it
Owen?
to, uh-huh,
But in that case, you're actually changing the original code, so you're not really testing the same code base, right?
exactly. So this is an example of why test-driven development is so important, right? I believe that it probably should have been done this way, right? And at some point, if we do a refactor of this code, like if I was going in and I had to change this method anyway, I would change it to this. But I'm not going to do it because I'm not having to change anything right now. But I was showing you
Gotcha.
that if I was to write this method today, this is how I would do it. I would use the injected property rather than the global thing that I have no control over. There are ways to sort of hack this using
Oh, I've done it before
tools
myself,
called
so I
mockery.
know.
Yeah, there's mockery has a thing called overload, which you can use, but the problem is you have to undo it and you have to make changes, and it's just not very maintainable, right? So as much as possible, if you are writing code and you're writing methods, please try to use dependency injection as much as possible. It's going to make your code a lot better, right? And maybe one of these days I'll do a whole nother tutorial on test-driven development in ProcessMaker,
That'd be awesome.
and we can actually write a feature, and I could show you. I mean, I'm by no means an expert in test-driven development, but I,
Don't
I
sell
think I know
yourself
enough
short,
to.
Nolan.
Well, I watch some of these videos by some guys, that are just really, really good at this stuff, and it blows my mind. I'm constantly learning things
That's how you get
about
better,
better
right?
ways. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's no end to what you can learn and to make code better.
And
And sometimes it's hard to find that balance of, Tony Hsieh was a fan of, who's a big, Tony Hsieh is a big name in Las Vegas. The guy who started Zappos, his quote was like, done is better than perfect, right? And
right,
you have to
someone
find
is,
that balance.
perfect be the enemy of great or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So you sometimes have to just throw stuff out there and get it out there and get people using it. And maybe it's not super testable or usable, but the company needs it right away. And you have to be aware that maybe you're incurring some technical debt when you do that. But finding that balance of well-written code, maybe not perfect code, but well-written code that is testable, that you have some unit testing around, or at least some feature testing. So if you think of testing as like a bubble, where the unit test is the very small part, and the feature is kind of the next circle. Um, and then the I guess you would call end-to-end testing is the biggest circle. It's like, what are you covering, right? So a feature test will cover many functions, right? And an end-to-end test, the biggest circle, that'll cover your UI, your UX, your API calls, many functions, down to your unit test, right? So you can cover a lot of ground by writing end-to-end tests and feature tests. The problem is that they're slower, right? And they don't cover everything, right? Because if I was to unit test this show method, I could easily write 2 or 3 tests where, hey, it's user one that is maybe an admin, or maybe the user is a non-admin and a regular user. I could just write out those tests really quick. If I was going to do that with a feature test where I have to test the API calls, it would be much more complicated because there's a lot more moving parts, right? And if I was to do an end-to-end test, I would have to have even more setup. I'd have to have my UI set up and all of these things ready. And
Is
end-to-end
that
tests
where
are very
Telescope
slow.
comes in?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so you can use Telescope like while you're doing your end-to-end testing, right? Because it allows you to use the great thing about Telescope is that it does allow you to, if you just needed to debug something really quick, you can just reload your browser, right? And
What
and
other
boom, you
stuff can we do with Telescope?
well, let's look through the list here. I haven't looked at this in a long time. Um, we can so these are all the broadcast events. These are similar to not always jobs, but these are going to be things. A lot of these are not super useful for development because, like, for example, every time you reload a page, the
Hmm.
session gets started. Exceptions is an easy way to just kind of look at every error that has come in so far. So we
I
saw
use
our
that part
first
all
error.
the time.
Yeah, this one's great, right? Um, Gates is these are going to show you permissions, right? And it's going to show you if anybody had attempted to do something. These were all allowed and let through. But if somebody had attempted to view something and you're trying to figure out why you couldn't say access a certain page because it's giving you a not authorized error, you could see if it hit one of these gates over here that then said not allowed. Um, this might be less important in the context of ProcessMaker because we actually front load all of this stuff. You'll notice that this all said it happened 18 minutes ago, and
Mhm.
we cache these. And this is just to make our app a little bit faster. So we cache all of our permissions up front. Uh, this is going to show you any outgoing connections, HTTP stuff, right? So this is if you use Guzzle. This is if you use the HTTP um, helper thing here. We might even be able to take a look at that. We can try it.
How do you turn
If
that
we
on?
go,
It's off, right?
yeah. Where? No, I think so. I think in Telescope you actually have to. There's a separate config, right, that we populate in here. This is going to. You have fine-grained control over the information that Telescope collects, and this is where you would do that.
Gotcha. So, but we would probably recommend anybody watching this to put that into their env file, right?
Yes, so this is where you would enable and disable certain features, or at least you would get this is where you could get the environment name.
Right.
So let's see if HTTP is in here. I don't see it.
Hmm.
Schedule gate watcher request. It must, well, request watcher is turned on.
Right. Well, I didn't mean
Uh,
to segue this.
oh, okay. Yeah, anyway, you could also just easily Google, I'm sure, how to
Yeah.
enable the HTTP client. And this is going to show you all the outgoing connections that your app is making, right? So anything that's going outside of ProcessMaker. Um,
It's super helpful when you're debugging like data connectors and stuff like that.
yeah, absolutely. You should be able to see all of those in here when this is on if you're looking at a data connector and you're having some problems there. Um, and also if you're just running a process, for example, that uses a data connector node, and you just want to see if it's actually
Work.
making the call for real, it should show up in here. Logs is fairly straightforward. This should be a much just like cleaner way of looking at what's in your logs file. Logs, in case you guys don't know, are stored when you run locally. They are in storage logs, and then it has today's date with ProcessMaker. So this was anything that gets logged. We log a lot of things, errors, non-errors. Um, this this stuff should all be in here in just a nice format. Um, Mail is any outgoing mail messages.
I like that
Uh,
one because you can actually also see the HTML of the email when you have it.
okay, I haven't looked at this yet, so I
Yeah,
just
when
remember
we later
hearing
I
that.
can show that part because I think that's
Mhm.
pretty cool.
So models is going to be, I think this is sort of like I guess you could call this a um, like an audit log or a security log. This is going to show whenever these are updated. So looks like user one got updated a whole bunch of times because we were making a bunch of changes to it, and it's going to show you. It should show you what changed, right? So if you want to look at, who added, who enabled a saved search or something, you'd be able to look at your models, you'd be able to look for the saved search model, and you'd be able to see what the model is and who did it, right? So this is like a security log or an audit log. It basically keeps track of all the changes to everything, and almost everything in the database, everything that's represented by a model. This is very useful. You also have to be careful because it could chew up database, um, a lot of database space, right? It's going to take up a lot of space in the database. It'll grow that table really fast. So just make sure you don't have this enabled when you don't need it, or you just turn off Telescope when you don't need it. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I
never
once
use
left
telescope
Telescope.
in
Huh?
production unless you're troubleshooting a major issue. Like, don't use telescope in production, right?
Yeah, there have been a couple times where Alex had to go in and ask CloudOps to enable it temporarily, right?
Right.
And that's fine, just to debug a certain issue. Um, Locally, feel free to turn it on. Just I once left Telescope turned on for months and forgot about it, and suddenly, oh, my disk is full. So it took me a while to figure out that it was because Telescope was left turned on. So it does chew up some resources. Um, Notifications is very similar to broadcasts, which we had. Where was
Events, I think, right?
that? Events? Yeah, very similar to events. So notifications are a type of event, right? But it's specific to I'm sending this to a user, right? So that would be like if a screen or if a process started and you had notifications enabled for that process,
Like
you'd be
anything
able to
that's
see
in the
them
bell
here.
on top right corner.
Yeah, so anything that shows up in the bell icon, right?
Cool.
Um, but let's see, did I? Yeah, up here, right? But here's the thing, though. Since this is a debugging tool, you're actually going to see everybody's. Here, there's only the 7
Right.
that I have specific to me. But in here, you'll see the messages that go to everybody in the entire system, right? Um, Queries is very useful too. Oh, I'm surprised this is enabled by default because this is also something that's going to chew up a ton of disk space
Oh
on your
yeah.
telescope table. This is going to log every query that gets run, and there are for every page load, there are like thousands.
I see that.
So
That one's
I
pretty long.
wonder.
Though. 7 seconds, or is that milliseconds?
No, they run quick.
Oh, that's one
Gosh,
millisecond. Sorry, I read that as seconds.
but what I was showing is like, for example, like, see, this is 8 seconds ago. Like, just if I clear this out, if I delete, and that's what these buttons do up here. That this will, I should probably explain that too. This will reload automatically. I think it is a polling thing. Um, uh, no, that's yeah, auto load entries, right? And then this is the clear for that. So just to show you an example of the query watcher, which is a really useful tool when you really need to know when something is broken between the database and the app, or it's something that a bad query is causing a problem, or oftentimes slow queries. It's what we have to deal with sometimes. But if I'm on just the about page is a very simple page. It doesn't load, it's not loading requests or processes or anything big. It's just a very simple page. It's probably the simplest page in the platform. And I go ahead and reload this, just that, I'm getting this many queries, right? So this is normal. It's fine. They run fast. A lot of these run in parallel because they're running through API calls from the front end, and that's okay. But just be aware that your log here can get very, very big if you don't forget to turn Telescope off. Redis, probably the same thing. I'm not sure if this is even enabled. Okay, it looks like it is. Um,
I don't even know how to read that though.
yeah, this isn't too useful, right? But and it's also because we're using Redis for a lot of things. We're using Redis as our queue driver. We're using Redis as our cache. And if you really need to get into the nitty gritty of something that got sent, you can view the entire Redis payload, which is what this is, right? A lot of this is only really available um, to ProcessMaker, but it looks like um, this was a message. It looks like a notification message that was sent to user ID 1, so the admin user. I think that's what this is. Oh, it's the session started event, right? So this is something, session started, you're going to see this a lot if you look in Redis calls or if you look in events, right? Because the event is triggered by the Redis call, or the event is the Redis call. And all that is it's telling any other tabs that you have open that that hey, I'm still here, and to reset the countdown in another tab, because we also have a like a 1 hour by default limit, and then you get logged out for security reasons, right? Um, anyway, that's what the session started event is. But anyway, you'll see other events in here. If I go and open, if I create a new request, I don't know, let's see. It should send me actually a number of, yeah, see, there's a whole lot of things that happen here. Um, I don't want to go into too much of this because there's a lot of stuff that's debugging too, like, hey, push the job into the queue.
Yeah.
Um,
So
oh,
one
process
thing
updated.
awesome
Mm-hmm.
about this is that Laravel, this is like native to Laravel, right? This is baked into it. So like I know
Mm-hmm.
I've personally used like New Relic and Datadog and all those things, and while they have their uses and they're useful, I mean this does a lot of that work and it's baked in, it's free, and it's just so easy to use. So I mean for a lot of the use cases you might use a New Relic type of tool. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like this could solve a lot of those problems, no?
Yeah, it's like 90% of Datadog and New Relic, right? Like Datadog and New Relic have some really nice features where you can do like waterfalls of your requests. It ties your requests to the database command, to the SQL queries, which is really nice. So you can look at all of it together in one screen in a nice package, that this was the entire life cycle of this request, and these are all the things that happened. Um, but honestly, about 90% of it you can get right here in Telescope. It is like a mini
And it's
Datadog
free, it's
or a
open
mini
source.
New Relic. Yeah, it's completely free, right? So um, the real value with Datadog and New Relic and similar services is the hosting, I believe, right? Is that they handle all of the, we don't worry if their database gets overloaded with SQL queries. That's not our
Right.
problem, right? So we don't run this on production because we don't want to have to manage that,
Just
right?
like our customers don't have to worry about that when they're in our cloud. It's just part of SaaS
Yes,
software,
exactly.
right?
Yes, that's for me to worry about when that
Yeah.
happens, when stuff
That's for
breaks,
no one to worry
right?
about.
Yeah, it'll show up on my desk. So, um, and then finally, views, I think, is any just okay. The watcher's turned off, and I think this is just it's a debug tool to show you what blade templates were rendered
Ooh, that
for
sounds
your view.
useful.
It could be because sometimes you have nested blade templates. You have
And the mixin stuff too,
partials.
would that help with all that mixin errors we always come across?
Possibly, the difference is that a lot of our you
And we lost Nolan to the famous bug. Hold
tend to
on,
load a blade
buddy.
template. Mhm.
Nolan, we lost you for just a second
Oh,
because I think this collab cam thing has some kind of bug where it times out, but you're back on now.
oh, okay, cool. Hey, anyway, what I was saying for views was that I don't think it shows JavaScript stuff, right? And a lot of stuff that we do is in
Mm.
Vue.js with the Vue.js router. And that stuff is just rendered one time by a single blade template. So if you're watching this view here in Telescope, you're probably only going to see the blade templates that then trigger the JavaScript code to render the page.
So is it safe to say Telescope is primarily a back-end debugging tool?
Yes, yeah. There's not. I don't think there's anything at all front end related in here whatsoever. Yeah, this is entirely listening to Laravel events. It's hooking into a lot of Laravel core code and logging that information into Telescope and putting it in a nice format. So front end debugging is a whole nother issue that's difficult with with Vue version 2, which is what we're using. When we upgrade to Vue version 3, it's going to make debugging a lot easier. They have a lot better debugging tools in Vue 3. But until then, debugging in the front end is just a matter of putting a lot of console logs in everywhere. You know? So that's just what we have to deal with right now. Yeah. Cool. So I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to go over, any other questions or
I
um
think that that was pretty comprehensive, Nolan. There were some questions in the chat that I was answering on LinkedIn, actually. Um,
great.
I don't see any other questions so far related to this stuff, but when you're watching this later on YouTube, please feel free to leave a comment,
Mm,
and someone, me, Nolan, someone will definitely respond and answer, hopefully. So I hope that this was helpful for y'all, and that those of you who are open source users, or those of you that have your own installations, or even just developing, hopefully this was enlightening, because only found out about this recently when I was, talking to Alex, and he showed me Telescope, and I'm like, whoa, what is that? We have to do a live stream on that.
mm.
So hopefully it was useful.
Yep. If you have any questions, just ping me or ping Ethan and he'll forward them to me.
Awesome. Thank you
And
so much for your time, Nolan. And
yeah,
again, thanks for jumping on last minute to cover. Really appreciate it, man.
no problem. Appreciate it.
All right,
Thanks.
everybody. Have a happy weekend. Bye bye.
Take care. Bye.